Hello lovelies, welcome to my channel. It's Hila here, Saturday Night Stitch, and thank you so much for tuning in. Today's video is part 2 of the sew along for this Burda 6 2023 dress. Now just to recap, in the first video went through the tracing and how to save your tracing paper by actually just taking down the measurements of the skirt panels, because the skirt panels are just rectangular pattern pieces. So if you just measure out your width and your length, and then you add on your seam allowances onto there, you can just cut those directly from your fabric by measuring direct onto the fabric. So we've done that. And as promised, in part 2, I'm going to talk about facings, linings, and how to finish those armholes or the neckline, because this is a sleeveless style. So these are all the pattern pieces that I have. I'm just going to put them to the side here. My fabric that I'm using is a viscose linen mix, and this is going to inform the type of finishing that I'm going to go for the armhole or the neckline. So the linen mix has got the look of linen. So you can see it's got that really lovely, charming, slubby texture that you get from linen. But the viscose makes it a little bit more easy care. So it's not quite as prone to the wrinkliness that you get from linen. And it has a bit more of a smoother drape than you would get with linen. But to me, it feels more like a linen without some of the problems that you might usually associate with linen, in the sense that it also doesn't take as long as linen to get that super soft lived in feel that you can get from linen that you have been using for years, and you've washed it and you've washed it, and then it gets to that point where it's really nice and soft. I think the viscose linen, in my experience, it gets to that point a lot quicker. And the colors, I find that the colors, they tend to be a lot brighter because it does have the viscose in there, and the viscose fiber really can get intense colors, as you can see with this brush strokes linen here. So this is going to be my fabric. So now then, the actual instructions in the magazine, they call for you to fully line the bodice. And this is because the dress has got very narrow sleeves. This is your center front and this is your side front. So this pattern piece doesn't have any seam allowances. So you're seeing exactly what the width would look like once it's been sewn up. So this is what you have here. Now this isn't much. This is just under 2 inches, right? And so in terms of a facing, it can be very tricky to try and do a facing on quite a narrow band. So I'm going to talk through some of the options that are available and which one I'm using. So I just wanted to show you very briefly what a fully lined one looks like. I had to go through my wardrobe to find what I was going to be using. So this dress, which was sharing the hanger with that other one, this is a Burda 7 2015 dress. And as you can see, it's got some these ones, this is even narrower than the ones that we have here. But I fully lined the bodice on this one. Such a lovely dress. I made this with a Liberty Tanner lawn, and I love wearing this, but I can only wear it in summer, in high summer. But as you can see, it is fully lined. And so that's the idea. If you follow the instructions exactly as they are, they require you to fully line it. Now, this worked very beautifully, in my opinion, for this fabric, because this is a Liberty Tanner lawn, absolutely beautiful. And I used Burmberg. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'll put it down there. And in my opinion, this is the finest lining fabric that you can use. It feels like silk. It's lovely. And it is soft and it moves like silk. But I think it only works with particular fabrics. It works with a wide range of fabrics, but there are some fabrics that I think it doesn't necessarily work with. And linen is one of them, in particular the linen viscose. So just coming back, I'll come back to why I think it doesn't work. But on this one, it works because a cotton Tanner lawn, it doesn't have as much shrinkage at all as linen does. And you'll be familiar with this. When you wash linen, it will shrink in and the weave will tighten. And then when you wear it, it loosens from your body heat and then it changes. Whereas with your lawns, your finely woven lawns, you don't get that much shrinkage when you wash them and when you press them. And it's the same with the Birnbeg. It doesn't get any shrinkage, or it doesn't get much shrinkage. It's almost negligible. So that is to say, the properties of the lining fabric and the main fabric behave similarly. And the moment you fully line a garment, or at least I found anyway, I tend to prefer low maintenance garments. I do find that fully lining a garment automatically makes it a bit more high maintenance, because it means that when I do wash it, I have to make sure that I'm drying it on low tumble dry, and then I have to iron it. It's really hard to try and wear a lined garment like this without pressing it, because the wrinkles of your lining will be showing through the wrinkles of your actual garment, unless you're working with thick winter fabrics. That's a bit of a different scenario, but we're talking about summer fabrics here. So for instance, with this dress, every time I wash it, it must be ironed. I can't wear it without ironing, which is why, though I love the print, it's a really gorgeous print, I never take this with me on holiday. So this is what you would have. It would look like this. Now, this works with a cotton tanalon, but with linen viscose, this, for me, my intended use for this dress is I want to be able to take this when I go on holiday in summer to Italy, where it's hot and I'm sweating, and I've got access to minimal laundry facilities, and I can wash stuff by hand and just hang it out to dry, and then I'll be able to put it on. So I need it to be a low maintenance garment, an easy maintenance garment. So I can't do, and in fact, I'm not going to do the fully lined one. And fully lining the bodice, it does elevate it. It takes it more from a casual kind of vibe to something that's just a little bit more elegant, a little bit more effortlessly chic. But this one is not meant for that. I'm supposed to be, I wanted to be able to put up with the rough and tumble of traveling around in the summer. So we come to the other option, which is using a facing. Okay, so I have this dress here, which I made a few years ago. This is a Simplicity pattern. Again, it's sleeveless. I think you're noticing a pattern. I love sleeveless dresses. And with this one, again, so even though the shoulder strap is not quite as narrow as the other ones, it is still quite narrow. And for this one, I used a hybrid approach. So I used a facing along the neckline. Simple, straightforward facing. And then I used a bias binding along the sleeve, because as you can imagine, if I had done a facing on the sleeve, on the armhole, sorry, not the sleeve, it's the armhole, on the armhole over here, then I would have had a situation where I've got this, and then I've got another one that's coming up over here. And I didn't want to do that, so I did the bias binding along the armhole. So this is a bit of a hybrid approach where there's a facing along here, and then there's the bias bound armhole. So again, the facing is also, it does require some maintenance in that this needs to be pressed every time it's been washed so that it can lay nice and flat. I can't just wear this without it being ironed. So it is a lovely compromise in the middle, and it can still create something that does look a little bit elevated, because the neckline on this, oh my gosh, it is so, so gorgeous. I really love this dress as well. And it's got this really nice deep back neckline. Anyway, we're not here talking about this dress, but we've seen the example of the mixed finishing where you've got the facing and the bias bound armhole. So what's becoming quite clear, obviously, is that the bias binding is the low maintenance one. It's the one that works really well for something that is low maintenance. And I think it will be suitable for the fabric that I'm using and for my intended purposes of the actual garment itself. And the nice thing with bias binding is you can do some really fancy stuff. So this is an Alda shirt dress, Adler or Alda shirt dress from Grainline Studios that I made. And I used a rose print bias binding on here, and it's just cute. You can add some really cute, lovely details when you use bias binding. So I do have an example of a bias bound neckline. So this is a kame blouse that I made, and I made some adjustments by doing some sashiko embroidery over here, and there's this panel that's called sashiko embroidery on the outside, but this is the bias bound neckline over here. So instead of having a facing, the neckline just has bias binding, which I cut from the actual linen fabric itself, so I didn't use a different one, and that gives a very nice neckline as well.
The other option is to do an all-in-one facing. So rather than the previous example that I showed where it goes around the arm and then you've got a separate one, this one is where it's almost like instead of doing a full lining, you only line just around the armhole and the neckline here. This one is a bit more work to do, particularly when it comes to understitching, in order to make sure that things aren't showing. And yeah, so I'm not actually doing this one, but this is another option that does create a very nice clean looking neckline and clean looking armholes. And this is the back. This is from Burda for 2020. I quite like this dress, and I used the same fabric for the lining, just because I wanted to be confident that I wouldn't have any issues.
So I'm going to be finishing my armholes and my neckline using bias binding, and that will make it very easy maintenance. It will be something that I can take along camping with me, and I'll be able to throw it on and throw it off. And because it is linen, viscose, my body heat tends to allow linen to just sort of loosen and lose its creases as I'm moving out and about in the day. So yeah, that is my rationale over what I am going to be doing. So if you're going to be fully lining it, definitely just go with the instructions that are on there. I do recommend making a toile, though, especially if you haven't traced out your pattern pieces without the seam allowance, so that you can check your length. So I can easily check my length because this doesn't have seam allowances. So I can see that my shoulder goes here. This is another Burda make, by the way. This is 2012, I think. I love it. It's really great. But we go here on the shoulder seam. Yeah. And I do that because this is a princess seam line, remember? So this is going to go down over here. I've got a really good idea that it's sort of is hitting my waist. So my waist is over here. That's where the narrowest part of my abdomen is there. So I can tell that this is going to be okay for me. I might need to add maybe a quarter of an inch, but I can take that off of the seam allowance. Some of the pictures that I have seen, they seem to indicate that the waistline is just a little bit higher. So if you wanted it to fall more along your natural waist, definitely do a toile. Or you could try and trace it out without the seam allowances and then check where it lands on your body. And then you can just make the adjustments like that, which is one of the benefits of learning how to deal with the patterns without seam allowances. Right, so that is what we have for today. I'm going to start cutting. So in part 3, we're going to start cutting, but at least you now understand thinking about how you're going to finish it. So start from thinking about the purpose of the dress. So if you're using, say, a cotton sateen and you're wanting to make it into more of an elevated, something that you can go for evening cocktails with, then absolutely go out there, find some lining fabric, which just is lovely. I really recommend Bamberg lining. I just think it's really, really wonderful. Failing which, you can always use the same fabric, the facing fabric, because the key thing, if you're going to go for fully lining your bodies, and I've learned this the hard way, by the way, I've learned this the hard way, that you need to have your lining fabric has to behave similarly to your main fabric, because if one has got a shrinkage factor, say, of about 7%, and the other one has got zero shrinkage factor, when you wash it and you dry it, you end up with this thing that looks a little bit pumpkiny, and it will straighten out eventually when you iron it, but I don't think there's a lot of fun in having garments like that. So just make sure that the lining fabric and the face and the main fabric, they have similar properties. That's the main thing. And obviously the lining, you just want it to be lovely, to feel really nice against you. I will put a link into where I got the Bernberg lining that I got. I actually bought it from Italy. It's a place in Milan. And of course, Milan is Italy. They experience very hot summers, so the fabrics that they're going to use for lining are really gorgeous and really feel really nice. So that's where I got my lining fabric from, and that's what I use. Okay, so this is all that I have for today. And until I see you next time in part 3 of the video, where we're going to do cutting out and getting started with sewing and talking about how to reinforce those curved edges so that they don't pull out. So until I see you next time, happy sewing. Bye. Oh, and P.S. if you have any questions, do put them in the comments box and I'll try and address them in the next video, which will be part 3. Until I see you next time. Bye.